latest higher education white paper. This report will be emailed to you after the event. A replay of the Avasant's digital forum will also be available on our event page shortly after this. As we aim to make these events interactive, we highly encourage you to ask questions throughout the session using the chat and Q&A features on your dashboard. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to today's moderator, Jim Rinaldi. Jim is the former CIO and currently the Chief Information Technology Advisor of Jet Propulsion Laboratories, as well as an Avasant Distinguished Fellow. Jim, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Adriana, and welcome to our attendees as well as our panelists. And I do want to leverage some of that research in the next slide to open the session with academic impacts. A lot of businesses have been impacted by the pandemic, no doubt about it. And we're seeing a big impact with educational, higher educational, and what's going on in 2020 and what the planning is for that. The impacts that our research has shown is that decline in enrollments, decline in international enrollments, that the offering of online courses has certainly grown for, in a large way because you just can't be there, and that we may see students drop out across North America and even Western Europe. So our higher education institutions are feeling the impact of this, and we'll explore that with our panel today. If we go to the next slide, there's also the economic impact. And these numbers are have great, they're quite large in the fact that these will hurt institutions. And so institutions are going to figure out new ways of bringing in revenue, tuition, and students. It offers certainly opportunities to do that, to do things differently. And I hope to explore that again with the panel. Can we go to the next slide? And so, with this cusp of significant and permanent changes, online education is here to stay. Asynchronous modes of education will come standard in the future. And we're seeing mid-sized regional universities, which have already offered large amount of content online, are better prepared for these changes. Faculty members have responded to the challenge well as they've adopted to creating their content and using and teaching from a different way than they have before. Can we go to the next slide? And so technology, which is one of the reasons we're here, is becoming essential even in the delivery of education, and has been for quite some time. But the role of the IT department, which we'll explore today, has certainly become front and center. And we're seeing that people are having to plan differently and probably change what their plans were thanks to this pandemic. Video conferencing, as we're using today, is now becoming a fundamental means, whiteboarding, more platforms in the cloud, and that's creating a more cloud-first approach for both collaboration tools, storage, and compute. Institutions are leveraging analytics extensively to improve learning effectiveness and to creating more personalized content, interactive forums, and so more breakout rooms as things progress. Courses are, even though they've been around for quite some time, are having more of an impact and for remote-centric content development for both universities and schools, ranging up to in the high school range. So let's go to the next slide. I would like to explore these things and explore we have a great panel today. We have from USC, from UCLA, and from Washington State University. So we have the Pac-12 kind of covered here. They may not be playing football, but the fact is we have the CIOs on the field. And so I would like to ask the panel to introduce themselves and say a few words about what they do, obviously CIO, but what they do in their respective schools. And what is your response to some of the information and some of the research I just outlined to you? And what do you see for the future? But I'd ask you to take just a few minutes each to do that. So Doug, if you don't mind starting.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I really appreciate this opportunity. I'm Douglas Shook. I'm the Vice Provost and the Chief Information Officer at the University of Southern California. A little unique, maybe not that unique, but I'm also a professor of data sciences at the Marshall School of Business. I was a professor before I became the CIO. I've had a variety of other roles at USC. I've been the Dean of Academic Records and Vice Dean at the Business School and the University Registrar. I served for a while as the Vice President of the Academic Senate. So it's been helpful to me because I actually have been involved on the, and I still do, I'm still an active professor teaching classes. So I'm my own customer. I'm in my own classrooms. When I was the University Registrar, I know what it means to create the schedule of classes and to change the schedule of classes as you move from on campus to online and to hybrid. And so it's been a very challenging, but also I gotta be honest with you, it's been very rewarding this since March 13th, when we, in essence, Friday the 13th in March, when we sent everybody home and said, we're gonna go online. And it was, you have a week and, we're going to be online. So I got to tell you, the staff and everyone's response and the faculty's response to a crisis at some level. If you think about everyone talking about, the impact on hair salons, the impact on restaurants, the impact on a lot of the retail outlets, the pandemic has been very disruptive. It has just totally undercut the entire academic delivery process. So across the country, across the world, universities have faced challenges in the last 6 months they've never seen before. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we've responded and what seems to have worked and maybe things that didn't work. But again, I appreciate being here. I thank you for this opportunity.
And Doug, for your services?
I'm sorry?
Are you a good customer of your services?
I'm a demanding customer, I think, partly because I was, to be honest, I'll be very transparent here. Before I took the role as the CIO, I wasn't a real happy customer of the central IT organization. I saw a lot of room for improvements. I don't think the central IT organization was focused enough on supporting research and supporting the actual pedagogical delivery that was core to the university. So I probably have been a thorn in the side of my staff because, good enough really isn't good enough. I want it to be better. I want it to be state of the art.
Well, thank you for that. Lucy, maybe you can introduce yourself and how long you've now been at UCLA and what you've done recently and in the near past.
Yeah, happy to share that. Thanks for having me. Lucy Avetisyan, I'm the CIO at UCLA. I started my role at UCLA on May 1st. And so it's been a transition, interesting transition during COVID. I sometimes share this with my colleagues that haven't been to my office yet. I don't know where that is, but I've gotten a lot done, I think, in the short time. And the focus for me was to get to know the organization, to get to know our key stakeholders, understand what challenges they're facing and what opportunities were there for me to identify and prioritize the work that we had to do. It's an interesting situation for me, and I know some of my UCLA colleagues are on this session, but this is a new role in a way for UCLA. This is it's combining the technology leadership role for administration and academia, whereas before that wasn't the case. So kind of defining that role is the focus. Additionally, to try to rethink technology services for the campus. And there are several initiatives underway that we're trying to figure out how to rationalize our services. How do we optimize what we do? How do we prepare for the future? What does that operating model look like? What services should and should not be on the portfolio? But before coming to UCLA, I've spent 21 years at USC, all my career in technology, and have had the opportunity to be in many different roles, and that's introduced me to the IT portfolio, starting from development, web development, all the way to programming, to business analysis, to project management, implementing enterprise solutions, and then leading applications and data portfolio as associate CIO, and then working with Doug as his deputy for 2 years and focusing on the digital transformation at USC. And that was probably the most challenging and the most rewarding experiences of my career, rethinking an IT organization at an institution that's so dear to me. Now that I'm at UCLA, I'm excited to kind of bring my lessons learned and my experiences, knowing that what worked at USC may not work at UCLA, but just really understanding how to prepare for the future and what is IT's role going to be. So I think I'm going to stop there, and I could share more details pertaining to what we're doing now.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. I really appreciate those comments. Sasi, we've been friends for 15 years. I met Sasi at NASA, and he was the CIO for Glenn Research Center. And he was a longtime CIO for Glenn Research Center. And then he went to the agency to become the agency CTO. And we collaborated quite a bit on new technologies for JPL and NASA. And Sasi, won't you introduce yourself, because you are now the CIO for Washington State University.
Yes. Thank you, Jim. First of all, my name is Sasi Pillay. I've been the CIO here at Washington State University now a little bit over 4.5 years. So I'm excited to be here, especially with my dear friend. I wouldn't call you old. I would say dear friend, Jim, and my fellow Pac-12 CIO. So this is really a pleasure and opportunity to kind of trade. Before the COVID, we used to get together at least 2 or 3 times a year as Pac-12 CIOs and compare notes as to what worked and what didn't work, and learning from each other. So I look at this as an extension of that platform. So it's a lot of things that are happening. I think Doug and Lucy alluded to that. I think this is the first time we're challenging ourselves to kind of get out of the mode of how Aristotle and Plato taught students thousands of years ago, to really take another hard look at how we want to look at learning and teaching, and how it reflects through a way that is both geographically and time-wise disconnected. So it gives all the variables that are out there for us to really invent and reinvent education. But some of the economic challenges, Jim, that you alluded to, they're real. Unfortunately, we are all going through that economic downturn. I'm hoping that this gives us an opportunity to significantly shift what higher education offers, not only to our, what I would call the traditional students, the recent high school graduates, but also millions of citizens who have partial college degrees, that we should be able to now make a really concerted effort to bring them into the fold.
So you bring up a good point, Sasi, and I'll ask the panel, so feel free, anyone take this. The fact that students are not necessarily going to be on campus for the foreseeable future, certainly this semester it seems like, unless there's some hybrid approach. The experience of going to college is part of the learning experience. How are you thinking about what the impact IT can have on that learning experience, on this growing experience? Because when you leave high school, life changes dramatically, and when you get on a university, it could be one of the best experiences of your life. And I'm just wondering, how are you guys looking at what you do to help that experience going forward? And hopefully we'll have a post-pandemic, but right now I'm sure your planning has to also consider what if it goes on longer. So who wants to take that first? Please feel free. Go ahead, Lucy.
I can go. So in the short time that I've been at UCLA, I've had the pleasure to be part of a couple of key task forces on campus. That one is the Future Planning Committee, and then the other one, the Academic Continuity Committee. And these are the leaders of the organization who regularly come together to think about how do we prepare for the fall and then maybe for the spring. So, and oftentimes as we're discussing, you know, how many students are we going to be allowed to bring back, or what percentage of classes will be in person, often the conversation went to how are we going to enable that experience to happen, especially for our freshmen who really come to our campus and crave that opportunity to get to know one another, to build relationships, to learn to live on their own, build those communities, and belong to this organization that they've worked so hard to get into. So, so we go to technology, and of course, throughout the organization, we have distributed tools that enable some of that to happen. And the goal this time was to bring one platform, and I know a lot of organizations are doing this, but bring Slack as a tool set that can combine their experience into one environment where they can go and collaborate with their classmates, communicate with their professors, or join communities and affinity groups, whatever that is that they want to do within one place, right? And then eventually try to integrate all the other tool sets with this platform to enable a seamless experience while they're remote. There's no way we can mimic what actually will happen if they were in person. It is really difficult to realize that, you know, we expected to have about 8,000, 9,000 students. This was back in June. And then it went to about 5,000 early August. And now it's probably 750 students that will be on campus. And these are students that have no other place to live, so to say. So I think the focus is to spend the rest of the time, we have another month or so because our fall quarter begins on October 1st, spend the rest of the time to make sure we have a holistic offering for our students to build that community and have that belonging to the organization and to one another, create those connections while they're remote.
Okay, thank you. And Doug, you had mentioned you have Slack as well at USC. Are you using it in a similar fashion to create a community and where students can get to know each other and maybe have a different experience than just, you know, work from home or study from home?
Yeah, just very parallel with Lucy's experience. We're a little ahead in the sense that we're at the end of week 3 or the middle of week 3. We started, you know, and so we really had to launch, you know, on 3 weeks ago. If you think about it, you know, there's the student experience. There's really 2 student experiences. There's the pedagogical experience. You know, do you feel like you're close to your professor? Do you feel like you're learning from your professor? Can you have casual conversations about? Can you go up after class and ask that one last question? And can you know, kind of get that mentoring relationship? But there's also, even in the classroom, it's the student who sits next to me and who I'm chatting with during class, and we have to be able to enable that within the class. And then addition to that, and this is, I think, where USC is perhaps even more challenged than many universities. As a private university, we're expensive. And for someone to say, you know, I'm going to pay that kind of money to go to USC and be on campus, and, you know, with the great facilities and the, you know, playing football at the Coliseum and all the stuff that students can do there's a, you know, value proposition. Well, if you're sitting at home with mom and dad now and all you see of USC is that Zoom screen, that might look a lot like the same Zoom screen that you could get for a much lower cost experience. So it fell on technology to raise the value proposition for this online experience so that students still feel like they have that, we call it the Trojan family, the Trojan experience. So we have, did a high level of automation at the beginning, and we've embedded, pre-populated all of the classes with Zoom sessions for the entire semester, configured with auto record and auto transcript so the students can do the asynchronous accessing. We also embedded the Slack channels into all of those classes. so that the students can have, the project meetings with each other and also the office hours of the professor and do the breakout rooms. But that whole kind of, outside of the classroom, students wandering around campus, meeting up with a coffee and chatting with people, and whatever. We created a portal, which I had very high hopes for, with some virtualization and things within a student experience. We call it the student experience portal. It's that one has been, I think, honestly, to be very transparent, not as successful as the social experience within the classrooms and in the project mode. Trying to simulate what it's like to be on campus and walking over to the student union and sitting across the table from someone you don't know and so you meet, that's been more difficult, and that will continue to be a challenge. I think particularly that will be a challenge for private universities that are charging a premium for partly that student experience.
Yeah, that's I'm imagining the parents are also a little upset in many cases because they were expecting the students to free up space at home and go to school. And
you mentioned
so it works both ways.
Yeah, you mentioned the parents. So it works also the other way, is that now the parents are actually looking over the shoulder of the student and they're watching the student in class. And the professors now are being held to a different level of accountability. Not only do they have to connect and teach the student, the parent sitting behind her is saying, is this class here worth $5,000, right? Or am I getting my money's worth, right? The students were never quite so concerned about the cost, right? But the parents, they're concerned about the cost. So it's been an interesting thing. So we've got a lot more involvement now. I've got a lot more emails and a lot more engagement with parents than I've ever had before. And it's because they're sitting behind their students, many cases, sitting in class.
I don't know if I would have expected that, that would be part of the reaction, but it seems to make sense. Sasi, you can answer the same question about the student experience, but also I would throw out to you, are there some newer methods that you're looking at? Is it gamification, more of the HoloLens type approach to things? And I'm just wondering, I know you're thinking in those from our past days, and I'm just wondering if you're considering that for the student and faculty population at Washington State University.
Yeah. Thanks for that question. So I think we are doing some of the traditional things that both Lucy and Doug alluded to, but we are also trying to evaluate teams. Teams provides a very nice collaborative arrangement for both the scheduling of the classes to some extent, but also the video conferencing, the collaborative workspace, and the ability for students to collaborate, not just discussing ideas, but actually whole projects themselves. So we are definitely looking into that method, making that happen. The scheduling classes through Zoom, we already did that, but I think we need to get to some sort of what I call social media, Facebook type of experience that the students are already know how to operate and be quite functional. The other thing is what Doug alluded to is learning from each other. To me, unless we provide a channel to do that, the whole experience of being a student at the physical university disappears. And that's part of what I would call, people learn, in my mind at least, two different methodologies, which are both equally important: experientially, and then learning from each other in teams. And those are the things I think we need to really pay attention to providing email, video conferencing, collaborative environments, document management. To me, those are all table stakes. That is not going to distinguish us from any other online experience that people could get, like Doug and Lucy pointed out, but much lower marginal costs. But so what we have to do is to work on that student experience to a level that is, I think, would be very interesting. So one of the things we want to look at in the process of looking at is how do we take 100 and 200 level courses and chemistry and physics labs, and how do we create that in cyberspace? Maybe the answer to that is to build those experiments that the students can interact with and learn to a point that we can do it in a way that it is in cyberspace. So one thing that appears to be very promising when we are looking at it is the gaming ecosystem. There are many platforms out there which will actually enable us to essentially translate physical phenomena into an experience in cyberspace with gamification as part of that. And then people can keep score and all that, makes it a little bit more competitive. And the students are already used to doing a lot of gaming and having what I would call gaming in groups, in teams against other teams. So the whole idea of taking their experience and where they happen to hang out and make that into a learning experience and introduce our concepts regarding physics or chemistry or what other sophisticated things we want to add. So in other words, you're sort of meeting our customer where they are and they're used to operating in. I think that is something that we should definitely take on. And by doing that, actually, it opens up the whole idea of online education. I think gone are the days when people used to ship a disc that you watch and then you write an exam and you send it back by mail. The people used to consider that as online education, and that's not what we're talking about here. I think we need to step up the game to do these kinds of things we're talking about and become more standard practice. Now, the other thing that's also equally important is that whole social aspect. How do we recreate that social aspect? And once again, I think many of you are probably familiar with the older technology called Second Life. There are similar situations in which you can actually create that social experience as well. So there is nothing stopping us actually creating the union building, the student union building completely in alternate space and have people go in and out. And you are an avatar, you can go sit down on a couch and talk to the person next to you exactly the same way that you would do in physical, in person. So these are the kind of things I think we need to bring into education to make it more interesting, exciting, and enjoyable.
Thank you. That last one I think is going to cause some heartburn as well, because you can't control what all avatars do.
Jim, we've got a couple questions if you want to take them.
Yes, let's do.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. First up, this is a tough one. Can you share some lessons learned that will help us counter the health and economic risks due to COVID-19 in higher education, at least for the next couple of years?
I can talk about the economic risks.
Go for it.
I mean, my crystal ball tells me we're going to be doing this for quite some time. I hate to say that, at least for the spring semester, I don't see any way out, and probably even beyond. Because if you were to take a look at what's happening, we're not going to get herd immunity anytime soon. You need to get to 70% infection. That means thousands of people being infected per day, which no hospital, and especially in a small college town, has the ability to withstand. So that's out. And the only other hope is vaccination. And even after it's available, the chance that it gets to everybody like you and I, it's going to be, again, quite some time. So we might as well plan this instead of saying, oh, this is only for the fall semester. We need to have a broader perspective on how we want to strategize and plan for maybe for the long term. But the silver lining here is whatever we do, I see many of these programs will sustain post-pandemic. So all these things we talked about already, what Doug and Lucy already talked about, and what we are doing at Washington State, all those things will survive. Those programs that we are putting in place will have a post-pandemic existence, and it'll even be better. The whole education environment would, in my opinion, would be even more superior.
So I don't know, Lucy and Doug, do you want to add anything to that from your perspectives?
The health, I'll touch since Sasi conveniently dodged how he's going to solve the health problem. There's no easy solution here. We've configured all of our classrooms for social distancing. We've done, we can require the masks. You can do everything you want on campus. The vast majority of the contagion that's occurring is occurring off campus. It's occurring in the sororities and the fraternities and the student housing. I mean, we're all here, we're talking about 18 to 22-year-olds out of the house for the first time. it's hard to have a romantic relationship when you have a mask on, right? It's not going to happen. These kids are going to get together, they're going to drink beer, they're going to do things, right? And that's what we're seeing. Actually, you know, we're fully online this semester, and we're still having some outbreaks off campus because the students who are living in not USC housing, even other housing nearby the campus are getting together. The neighbors are complaining because there's kids are out gathering on the front yards and things like that. So, and then you combine it with the average age of the faculty who are going to, you know, ultimately, and we go back into the classrooms, many of the faculty are in that high risk category. And then you're going to take a high risk professor, stick them into a classroom with kids who were all out drinking beer and partying last night. And, you know, we have the Trojan check where we do, you know, do you have symptoms, you know, and all that stuff. You can't come to campus if you don't have symptoms, if you have symptoms and all that. Well, you know, you're not gonna have symptoms from last night, right? So it's the perfect, you know, crossfire hurricane for what you don't want to happen. So if someone does have a solution for how to keep students from being kids, and it's, you know, that's the magic question.
I don't think there's an app for that, but I do want to ask, because you both raise an interesting dilemma that this goes on for a longer term. What is the long range plan? Lucy, at UCLA, there's, if this goes further and people are getting used to working or attending classes from home and the like, is the IT, or there are changes that you have to do to make that experience better? Some of the things Sasi mentioned, but are there things you're thinking of that is going to have to let's pretend the pandemic was over as well. What are some of the things you're going to keep going forward too?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. If I may, I just want to add something that, and I'll come back to your question, but add to something that Doug said about how are we mitigating the health risk? And that's substantial, and there's no way to control it. It's just to mitigate it, right? We do our very best to put some structure and some tool sets in there. We're implementing Salesforce's work.com solution to help with contact tracing and with, you know, daily health checks that we're going to do. And we're requiring daily attestations. We're expecting to test all the kids that are going to be on campus. But like Doug said, we have no control, jurisdiction over what happens off campus, what happens in the sororities and fraternities, and 80–90% of them are coming back and they're at full capacity in their houses, and there's nothing we can do about it but just to make sure we're testing those kids who do come to campus. And we all saw what happened at University of Alabama, you know, 550 cases in a week, the Notre Dame, North Carolina, and all of that. So I think, like Sasi said, we're probably going to be in this situation for a while, and technology is going to be hopefully the enabler to keep our students engaged and our faculty comfortable to continue operating remotely. We wanted to do as much as we could in the summer to prepare for the fall, and I think we've done a lot, but there's more to do. If this continues, we're in the process of implementing a new LMS system, and how do we think about this not in a traditional way where it's just a learning management system, but it integrates with all these other solutions, be it the Zoom and Slack and enabling other functions. The whole offering needs to be thought out for the student experience, for faculty experience. And I think the shift, in my mind at least, that's we have to stop being so in love with our traditions and falling in love with our students and what they want, and our faculty, and understanding what they want. So as we're designing these solutions, engaging our students and our faculty in them, having them be part of our steering groups and advisory groups so that we know what solutions to offer, and learn from them what works for them. So I think that's, at least I'm hoping to engage more with our students and our faculty as we bring solutions to them. Yeah, I think I'm going to stop there.
Okay.
There's so much.
Thank you. Doug, I wonder if you wanted to add something to that for what are you planning for the future? Is it similar to what Lucy was saying? And whether the pandemic continues or it stops, there are things you're probably going to carry forward. And I'm just wondering what those are.
Yeah, so one of the things, as was pretty painfully obvious, even before we were in the pandemic, there is a group of students in our community who are actually, I would say, pretty sizable, because a third of our incoming freshmen are first generation students. And so that brings in a different challenge about their availability, access to technology, and so on and so forth. So when we flipped the switch, like Doug was talking about, middle of March, I think kind of happened for all of us. We started doing remote instruction. I mean, my colleague who's in charge of online education, he and his team did a series of faculty development exercises to make sure that the faculty is fully versed in all the tools we are able to offer. And that was very successful. But the thing that was missing was that there are students who kind of got left in, fell through the cracks because of three things. They didn't have access, availability was not there, and affordability, the 3 A's that I talk about. And because of those, we had to actually step in immediately and put together a loaner laptop and hotspot program. And we did that. So we already spent well over $1 million now. And we just started our second semester, a half a semester in spring, and we just had 1.5 weeks of classes. We're pretty much pushing about $1 million already in this program that we did not have before. And this is a program will continue to exist with or without a pandemic, because we are not serving the needs of all the students the way we should have been. And this, going to remote education made that difference, that digital divide we always talk about, so apparent. And so we're really stepping up, and the university is spending the money. We're not asking the student to spend a dime on this. The university is underwriting the cost of this to continue to offer this. And the other thing we did was also create parking lot Wi-Fi. It's not the best answer. It's not an answer to broadband, lack of broadband. But as an extension, as a land grant institution, we have locations in every single county. So 39 counties and plus another half a dozen other development centers. So we enable parking lot Wi-Fi's in all of them. And we deploy EduRoam. So even students from UCLA and USC, if they happen to be in the Pacific Northwest, can access WSU Wireless and get their work done. And we also made it available as a guest network. But the nice thing was the state of Washington, their Commerce Office, picked up on that, and they provided the money. And now the 60 locations we stood up has blossomed to over 600 across the entire state, which is phenomenal. Again, I would not be the first one to say this is the answer for full coverage of broadband, but it is a stopgap measure to address the needs of many of our students.
Certainly so. And Doug, Sasi went off sides there. And so I'll throw a penalty flag on him. But you are also going to answer that and give us your thoughts on the future and whether there's a pandemic continuing or post-pandemic. What do you see staying and what do you see changing?
Well, Lucy knows me well enough to know that I'm frustratingly optimistic. I'm Pollyannishly positive, and it sometimes drives the people around me nuts. But I'm not making light of the pandemic. The pandemic is horrible. Thousands and thousands of people are dying. It's caused economic devastation. It's going to retail outlets and other places. It's going to close colleges that will never come back. It's going to have a horrific impact. At the same time, it's going to have positively impact higher education as we know it. We will never go back to where we were. Now, I do fully believe that the on-campus undergraduate education model will be the prevailing model once we come through this pandemic. I do believe, though, that once people realize I don't have to move to Los Angeles and live in an apartment and pay and put up with the traffic and everything else that comes with Los Angeles and the expenses, I can stay in Colorado and get my MBA. I do think this is going to revolutionize how we deliver online education. We are even doing things now like with augmented reality and virtual reality on Labster. Now you can do virtual dissections. You can do there are things that there's a lot of things that we do on our side respond us so that we make sure that we can actually give exams at home and know that you're not cheating, or be relatively sure of it. We are actually looking at, grading methods now, because everything's online, that I can see who's having problems with certain types of homework, or who's diagnostic grading and giving feedback to the faculty. We're looking at how many sessions get streamed and how many sessions are being recorded and how many people are accessing it. Now we've got it so all of our sessions are recorded. We have about 13,000 international students, many of them from Asia, 15 hours ahead of us. For them to attend class synchronously, it's 3 in the morning for them. They can now take class at their own time. So we've enabled asynchronous education. We have done, this is putting people into flipped classrooms. This has got a lot of our faculty actually going back to school themselves and learning how to teach in this new environment. We have put up so much documentation and so many tools and resources out there to help people in this environment. So there's no going home. We're not going to go back to Kansas after this one. So this is going to fundamentally change the higher education paradigm. Now,
so I know we have, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Doug.
I say where I do see there's a challenge is for some of the perhaps smaller liberal arts and other colleges. You can be in this small town now, and rather than going to the local university, you can go to a regional or a national or international university. So the competition now, people tend to go to college within X number of miles from their home. That's just been a historical fact forever. Maybe not anymore. Maybe not anymore.
Do you see the day, I'll ask all three of you, and we only have a few minutes left, but this has been such a good
Jim,
panel.
we've got till about 2:50 p.m. PST.
Oh, okay, excellent. So my question is, do you see the day where the curriculum may be student-driven, and the courseware I take for data analytics at USC, the courseware for computer science I may take at UCLA, and the courseware for gamification or other technologies would be at Washington State? I mean, do you see being a possibility, given that if we're creating content online, the curriculum could be multi-universal?
Yeah, so if I could, so that is going to require even more collaboration, because at the end of the day, everybody is looking at what's our revenue stream. But I want to add to what Doug said, like about going back. I completely agree with that. I mean, so like I said, even some of the smaller things that we started as part of the pandemic, it's going to stay forever. But one thing I want to say is that we as institutions, as educational institutions, we should not be so biased towards only entertaining high school graduates. I think we need to think broader. There are at least 40, studies show there are at least 40 million citizens of this country who have partial college credits. They would love to get and finish their degree. And I think some of these programs that we are doing, that Doug talked about, Lucy talked about, and I talked about, in making education fun and being able to do it remotely, both time and geographically separated, both synchronous and asynchronous, in other words, it's going to be a huge improvement in terms of increasing our bottom line. Because financially, I think we are not, as an industry, I should say, higher education, we are not paying enough attention to those adult learners. I think if we do that, our issues regarding financial burden that we have right now as we go through this pandemic can easily and quickly erased if we kind of broaden our market space.
So Andriana, I see we have quite a few comments and questions, and
so many good ones.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you could pick out a few that we can ask the panel.
Absolutely. First of all, Doug, I wanted to let you know that one of your former MBA students is in the crowd and he says hello. Okay, our question is, the remote learning situation has significantly amplified privacy, inequality, and accessibility challenges, as well as security. How are these kinds of academic challenges thought through, governed, and implemented?
So who wants to take that question first?
I'll take it. So sure. The privacy issues are actual very, very interesting, right? So once you start Zoom and people now are visible, right? And now also because we want to be able to provide asynchronous access to our content in every class, for the international students. Also, there are students that have needs. So maybe they have hearing issues or they have other issues and they need the transcriptions, right? And so this gets done. So we've had a lot of students and faculty voice concerns about, is this safe? Is my information secure? Are you protecting my data? And this is just raising the bar. So we're doing this. And so we did a lot of analysis on, for example, Zoom. We're using Zoom for streaming the classes. And in fact, we made sure that they migrated all, that where our servers have to be located in the domestic United States. They can't be overseas. Things like this we have to look for. There are other challenges where chat functions. What happens to chat functions? Who can see my chat functions? Do they get stored publicly or not? So we made sure that private chats don't get stored, and lots of issues like that. But yeah, you need to have some policy. There are people who, we've had issues with people saying, I mentioned before, we use Respondus to lock down your browser at home and maybe turn on a monitor so we can actually watch you during an exam. Some students will say, I don't want this app on my laptop, on my endpoint. I don't feel secure with this. Well, we've had to have some hard conversations. This is how we're going to administer exams. And if you're going to take exams in this program, you have to do this, right? So there's been some hard back and forth. It wasn't like before that students couldn't pull out a camera or pull out their phone and record the session, right? They could do that before, but now it's being raised, right? And people are challenging whether or not these video conferencing platforms are secure and safe, and what's happening with my chat, and who's seeing my recordings. How long are you going to keep the recording of the class after the end of the class? Are you going to destroy it within, after final grades post? Are we going to keep it so that you could use it for flipped classroom for the next semester? These are all policy issues that really have nothing to do with technology. It all has to do with kind of the IP and privacy issues. But we have a privacy person at USC. We run everything past, and some of these decisions are compromises, and not everyone's happy with either we can't do something because of privacy concerns, or someone who has privacy concerns is not fully satisfied with the level or the degree to which the privacy is protected.
Doug, if I could just add to that, I mean, I think you touched on it. The intellectual property that is generated by the faculty members is also another concern.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, a lot of faculty at some level, they'll tell you, I don't want you stealing my stuff. If you have all my stuff recorded, you don't need me anymore, right? I think some faculty don't want their classes recorded because they don't want to have anyone see how poorly they perform in the classroom, right? I mean, it could be on either side of it.
It's the big brother watching, right?
Yeah. Well, I guess that is a major concern. Just like cybersecurity across your campuses has got to be a major concern. Ransomware, things like that. How are you protecting during a pandemic and everybody being remote? What are you prioritizing in terms of cybersecurity? And Lucy, I'll start with you if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I want to recognize that Jim Davis, who I work very closely with, actually asked that question. And it's because at UCLA, we're trying to figure out what is the best approach to govern, how we procure software, how are we introducing this to the campus, what kind of security, privacy, accessibility assessments need to be in place before we say, hey, this is an enterprise-wide approved, cleared solution that we want you to use. And then how do we work with faculty who may not agree with all of that, right? So we're still discovering what are the best policies or recommendations to implement throughout the campus. And that's maybe at another time we could dig deeper and understand how you two are doing that in your organizations. But as it pertains to security, this is part of it, right? We have our CISO basically reviewing a lot of decisions that we're making, and these decisions are happening so quickly. And it's not all related to software procurement, anything like related to even, COVID mitigation platform, or, how we contain the data that we collect for these surveys that we're conducting daily, health surveys. So all of those are Yeah, so that's what's taking so much time. And as it pertains to security, I think there is an appetite to introduce a more robust awareness program for the campus, so that why can help us. So clarifying why we're doing this and how important it is will help us partner with our academic senate, with our faculty, staff, students to introduce more specific security guidelines and policies that may not be in place yet, but are much, much needed.
So I would just add to that. So one of the things we have done is to put multi-factor authentication in front of all of our systems and services. So that really, because most of our compromised accounts are through the student accounts, I hate to say that. And so we are actually taking, we have pretty much close to 90 applications going through MFA. Our now next big challenge is getting the Office 365 environment behind it. But all of the others, we already moved it that way even before. We started doing that even before the pandemic. So we're slowly getting more and more under that. That is a big thing. The other thing I would also say as CIOs, I think what we're trying to do, that I would speak for Washington State, what we're trying to do is to create environments, for example, to do research with regulated data environments. We are taking the lead in central IT to set up that environment so that each faculty doesn't go off and create something which might just meet their needs minimally and which will not stand the test of an audit, especially by the feds. So what we're trying to do is to create these things centrally and then only charge marginally for usage. And so to drive compliance, so that way the faculty member or the researcher can just focus on their discipline, and we in IT take care of the security profile, the controls, alternate controls if needed, all those things in place. So basically it's like walking into a home that is completely and fully furnished with all the kitchen appliances and cookingware. So you just start living there kind of thing. That's the approach we're trying to take, because if you leave it to the design of individual groups to implement, first of all, they'll implement it differently, which will not satisfy all the controls. Worse, then we have to run around and assess each one, whether it's HIPAA compliant and FERPA compliant, or maybe external exports controls, right? I mean, you can go on, and all of a sudden we'll spend a lot of our money in research and money and effort in what I would call assessing these separate environments. If you create a single one that everybody can use, it'll be cost effective, secure, and we just do the assessment once.
Yeah, yeah, and Doug, I have.
So Jim, we've got a few more minutes left.
Okay.
But I just want to throw one more on the cyber here. One thing that happened for us on March 13th was, prior to March 13th, all the good people were on campus inside the firewalls. All the bad people were in the, all the normal suspects, but they were outside of the firewalls, right? Well, now overnight, all of our good people are outside of our firewalls with the bad people trying to come in. So this totally changed the landscape for cybersecurity. So at this point, if you're not doing endpoint protection or moving towards doing endpoint protection, you are very, very vulnerable. And this is just a fact of life, because there's no, you can't tell the good guys from the bad guys anymore if you don't have endpoint protection.
Well, and you have the other vulnerabilities, including phishing and including, website maintenance. I think, Sasi, when you talked about using, thin clients, I don't know if you mentioned it that way, but the fact is, you could put security on those devices across the board with one task.
Yep.
And are you seeing the benefits of that? As a number of events, we got to. One of the things is you can measure, but what about, so you make a change and you measure. And I'm wondering, and I was going to ask Doug this too, is the analytics, what data are you using to guide you that you're making the right decisions, and are even at that point yet because of certainly the frantic level of during the pandemic?
So 2 points. One of the reasons we chose a Chromebook for our loaner laptop program is precisely the reason, Jim, you said. So the maintenance and upkeep of that endpoint is very simple. Basically, they need a browser. Everything else we provide into those services either is remotely hosted or in the cloud. So we try to minimize the threat surface all the way back to where it starts with the end user. So that's one of the things we're doing. Now we do have an integrated SOC and NOC at Washington State University, where we're beginning to look at these statistics. But what Doug points out is absolute reality. Is that I used to say we need to be able to do secure computing in a compromised environment. Guess what? We are there now. Okay, so we can no longer hide behind the firewall. In fact, I think we spoiled our application developers to the point their answer was not to worry because we have a moat that separates us from the bad guys. But there is no moat. So one attempt is the MFA that protects you to some extent, right? But the point of the matter is we need to be able to step up our game to be able to do these types of computing and provide these computing capabilities and really operating across this network, which is not at all secure. So these are the things I think our security team is, staying up nights thinking about how do we now protect the majority of the people who have absolutely no use for the firewalls.
So one final thing, and then Adriana's going to shut me down. Last words, and if you could make it quick, and I'll start with you, Lucy, is your final thoughts on your priorities going forward and what gets you excited about the future.
So I often say I'm an IT leader, but I'm also a change leader, and I love to think about what is it that we can do now so that it makes things better for our customers in the future. So one of the things we're rethinking the operations of IT throughout the campus, and how do we optimize that? How do we make it more cost effective, more rational, and better serve our community? So that's a priority for me, to rethink IT services throughout the campus and partnering with our distributed units to make it right. The other thing is really something that Sasi said earlier, recognizing that we now have lifelong learners, and how do we rethink our operating model and our offerings to cater to that stakeholder group as well. So that's something more strategic. And then security is top of mind for me right now, and how to make sure we have the skill sets and the organizational capability to mitigate security risk throughout the campus.
Thank you, Lucy. Doug, any thoughts on that?
Again, I'll go back to my Pollyannish approach. I see so much opportunity here from going forward. The data analytics piece, I'm a data science guy, right? So right now I can tell you how many sessions get Zoomed, how many classes, I can tell how many of those % of those classes get recorded, how many of the recordings are getting accessed, how many people are actually attending class synchronously. I can tell you how many people viewed the recording asynchronously and combined and have attendance. We got all these measures now that now people are actually stepping back and say, well, do we want to know that? Right? So there are a lot of opportunities here. Now, the other thing from the IT side, we're all IT folks, LA is, it's an expensive town to live in. I have to be able to pay a high premium to get good business analysts and systems, engineers and programmers in. Not anymore. I can recruit in your backyard. I can, if you're out there in Boise, Idaho, or someplace where the cost of living is very different, I can offer your programmers a very attractive contract to work for USC now. And so I could lower my costs. I also now can recruit people from the mountains of Colorado who may never move to Los Angeles to work, and they're the best data science or the best security guy in the world, person in the world. I can hire them now. So think of the opportunity now if you just break down these walls about how you hire and what kinds of contracts and how you work and so forth. So in same way for attracting students, just your students don't have to be in your town anymore. There's a lot of opportunity here that we have that we never had before. I think the pandemic, by and large, is going to have a very positive long-term impact on higher education and IT. I think it's not going to cause anything to happen that wasn't going to happen in 5 years or 7 years eventually anyway. It's an accelerant. It's forced us to do things in a much more timely, much more quickly, kind of unsettling manner. But we would have been doing the same thing in 5 years or 3 years or 2 years if we were forward-looking and thoughtful and strategically envisioned and kind of aggressively attacking opportunities. So, I don't want this to be all, dooms and doom and gloom. Yeah. There's a lot of positive and a lot of opportunity as a result of this pandemic.
And thank you for that. And Sasi, 15 seconds. Give us your optimistic view.
Okay, I don't know if I can say anything in 15 seconds. One thing Doug touched on is, and we didn't spend any time, maybe that's another thing we should do, is how it has also changed the landscape for employer and employees. My entire staff, okay, except for 2, are working completely remotely. I mean, gone are the days that people have to walk up and down the hall and make sure you're sitting in your chair. You know, actually people are more productive. In fact, I had to send emails to people who say, stop working, because they are working 24/7 now.
Yeah.
As opposed to only working 10 hours a day because when they're in the office. So
That's right.
we have to pay attention to the health and wellness of our employees as well. That's a caution that I think I want to put out there.
Thank you. And I have to tell you, this is an excellent panel. Thank you so much, Doug, Lucy, Sasha, you guys are awesome. Really enjoyed it. Adriana, I'm sorry we went over a little bit, but I think it was well worth it.
Could I stop a conversation like that? Thank you to all of our speakers. Your thought leadership is invaluable. Thank you to all of our participants for joining us. You will receive an email with a replay of the video as well as our latest higher education white paper. If you have any questions that did not get answered, please email us at events@avasant.com. You can also check out more of our upcoming events and research at avasant.com. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.